Fresh out of college, our next speaker worked for the famous Digital Equipment Corporation, or DEC. He's also worked on another number of he's had a very interesting history. He worked on the Oxford English Dictionary project at the University of Waterloo, where they made it all available in SGML. And he developed one of the earliest web search engines. He worked on the XML and XML namespace specifications. And today he's here to talk to you about a topic that's very near and dear to my heart, dynamic languages. He's the Director of Web Technologies at Sun. So please welcome Tim Bray.
Do I have slides? No, I have slides. Okay, my name is Tim, and I have background music. And they gave me a volume control pedal here. Alright, so I know this talk was supposed to be about an inflection point, but it ended up just being a bunch of questions, of which only a very few of them have answers, so let's just get into questions. And the most obvious question that we as programmers might be interested in is, well, what are we programming in? There's quite a bit of interesting data on that subject around the web. If you go off to LangPop and look at the, measuring by Yahoo searches, which, searching for a language isn't a very high degree of commitment, but C, Java, C++. If you say, well, let's go to Amazon and see who's buying books, buying books is a little bit more of a commitment than just doing a search. What do we got? C, Java, Visual Basic, C++. You go to Google Code and look and see what projects are getting launched. That's a bit more of a commitment. C, C++, Java, PHP, Perl. And then, if you go to Fresh Meat, well, that's where things are actually getting released. So, that much higher degree of commitment. C, Java, C++, PHP. And perhaps where, real meaty commitment is, who's getting hired. Go to Craigslist jobs and what is this SQL of which you speak? Anyhow. That's what's going on. And then, of course, our gracious host at O'Reilly publish on their radar site at least once a year a heat map of what's hot in programming languages based on book sales. Not just O'Reilly book sales, but everybody's book sales. And the area of the squares in this thing corresponds to the volume of sales and the color ranging from hot green for fast growth to hot red for fast shrinking. Tells you whether they're growing or shrinking. And you see things like Ruby and Python growing, as you might expect. It just kind of puzzles me that Java seems in a steady state since we're all Ajaxing these days. Then, of course, there's the well-known TIOBE index. And I don't really know what their methodology is, but what they show tends to correspond fairly well with my perception of what's going on out there. Perhaps more interesting than the TIOBE index itself is their trend line history, because whether or not you buy the details of their methodology, assuming they hold all the factors constant, whether something's going up or down is presumably interesting. Now, all these graphs make me a little nervous, given that I spent the last 2 or 3 years of my life browbeating Sun to get serious and invest in Python and Ruby, which, just aren't the big players on this graph. But, well, I feel better when I look at the growth lines as opposed to the actual numbers. But we've got an extremely valuable source of data available to us right here in this room. And so let's do a quick show of hands. And can we turn the lights up a little bit, please? So I'm going to go around this graph from clockwise, starting at C. And for each one, I'm going to ask you if you're currently using it. And then I'm going to ask, would you be in an ideal world? So, you can take you can do an, and so the relative numbers of hands that go up and then the change when an ideal world should be interesting. So, everybody out there, who's currently using C? Wow. And in an ideal world, would you be? Ooh. C++. Who's using C++? Fewer. In an ideal world? Who's using Java? And in an ideal world, would you be? Oh, man. Who's using PHP? Wow. In an ideal world? I'm waiting for one of these languages to have more hands go up after. It hasn't happened yet. Who's using Perl? Yeah. In an ideal world?
Perl 6.
Who's using Python? Wow. In an ideal world? Hey, a positive delta, guys, the first one. Who's using Ruby? In an ideal world? Wow, big positive delta. Who's using JavaScript? In an ideal world? So that's interesting data. I would recommend that the organizers of this conference might want to put a poll on the registration form because, high quality data. Okay, so now let's go and look at some of these languages in detail, and let's look at, the question of whether you should do things in Ruby, Perl, or Python. And wait a second, you just come off a whole week of conference. If you don't know about that stuff by now, nothing I can say can help you. Okay, let's talk about whether we should do things in C++. No, we hate Sid, my precious. It makes our eyes burn. Let's talk about whether you should be doing things in PHP. Now, PHP is interesting. If you look at those graphs I was showing earlier, it's pretty obvious that PHP is a big deal. It's got low barriers to entry. It gives you by nothing a shared default architecture to your application, so it scales pretty well. And, if you came to my talk on Wednesday, we were showing off NetBeans PHP support. And on top of that, some of the truly great applications are in PHP. Each one of these are arguably, in their space, as good as anything in the world. I have a personal connection with WordPress. My wife blogs in it. We use it to publish my kids and my pictures of my kids. But, I'm uneasy. The next slide describes the state of my soul when I think about PHP. And here's the problem. I hate PHP. I would rather drive nails into my head than actually try and build something serious in PHP. I look at the steady flow of security problems, and I look at actual real deployed PHP code, and I see spaghetti SQL wrapped in spaghetti PHP wrapped in spaghetti HTML, and I want to puke. And it can be done well, but usually it isn't so much. And so on Sun's behalf, I go around and tell big customers that, you want to deploy a wiki or a blog publishing system. PHP is not bad, but should you be using it for your own stuff, that you're building from scratch? Well, maybe not. On the other hand, if some bright young people have an idea for a startup, can I in good conscience tell them not to use PHP? Just because I don't like it? And that leads to a really big and important question, which is, does language design matter? I mean, PHP has 5,000 entries in its top-level global namespace, and it has grafted on OO, and it thinks it's just fine to splash random pieces of SQL around your source code, and by most standards of what people consider good language design, it isn't. And yet, it works. It produces great results. So, anyhow, that's all. That's just a question. So, should you do things in Java? I'd like to start by quoting from my colleague Ted Leon. He wrote this just recently, and it's true. There was an order of a decade long when all of serious commercial projects that were started had to be started in Java or .NET, and the sysadmins used Perl. But the notion that the ethos that we have today, where there's like a half a dozen language choices that you can use when you're starting a project, that's a new thing in the world. But Java, what about Java? I mean, I'm starting to have a serious attitude problem about Java. This is a piece of Java source code taken from James Clark's wonderful RelaxNG validator. James Clark is one of the 5 best computer programmers in the world, if you ask me. And this is a wonderful piece of software. And I look at this, and oh man, I mean, there's like 13 lines of code there, only 4 of which do anything. And I don't know about you, but I don't really have time to write 13 lines of code to have 4 that do anything. But what about Java? I mean, Java is actually a 3-legged platform. You've got the JVM that runs things. You've got this huge universe of APIs, effectively all of them now being open source, that do useful stuff for you, and then you've got the Java language. You don't have to be a genius to see that one of the legs of that tripod is replaceable. And whereas the Java language may be getting kind of past its sell-by date, the Java platform is still interesting, if only because it represents the result of engineering millennia of investment, and represents essentially the crystallized enterprise IT memory of the deployed business structure of the world. And it's the big league. It's the big game. It's got the most developers, the most user groups, the biggest libraries, the biggest everything. And you can't ignore it. How about doing things in C? I mean, C is kind of old, primitive, and it doesn't know what a closure is, or a class is, or an actor is. And I can remember when I was learning Unix in 1979, and there was this great sort of intro text that we were passing around, and it said a quote, something along the lines of, if you're going to build anything serious, you have to use C. And that might not be true anymore, but it has been true in substantial part for the last 30 years, and there are some results of that. Here's some C code I wrote recently to do some, URI/file path munging, and the horrible thing about C is that it forces you to write code like that. But, the wonderful thing about C is it lets you write code like that. That could have been written 5 different ways using, an index variable instead of 2 pointers, or with a while loop instead of a for loop, and it all would have compiled down to the same code, so who cares? C is flawless. It really is. If you want a compiled language that has an accurate representation of what actually is running on the machine, I just can't imagine how you'd improve on C to achieve that. And by the way, at this point I'm going to swell the background music, which is at a quiet part, Drat, which by the way is in C, a piece of music by Terry Riley. Look at him, what a geek. He wrote that in 1964. And Pete Townsend was listening to it a whole lot around the time that he wrote Bob O'Reilly. And if you listen to that, and this, and then this, and then that, you can really hear it there. Returning to the question of doing things in C, there's this problem, which is that everything's in C. I mean, there are some operating systems that have been written in C, and there have been some databases, and some GUIs, and some productivity suites, and some, well, stuff, and one or two languages that you might want to use someday, and all of the web infrastructure. So you want to be an open source programmer, you can try and kid yourself that you can ignore C, but ain't gonna happen. We're at an unusual point in the history of all this, which is that we are at an inflection point. The nuclear winter of Java and .NET is over, and there is right now, this year, a chance for other languages, new languages, to get into the picture. Now, I've recently had the opportunity to learn a whole bunch of new languages. I'm running this project called Widefinder, that I don't have time to talk about, but type Widefinder into Google. And I posed the problem, and lots of people have submitted answers to it in languages, including some of these. Groovy is trying to be the definitive JVM scripting language by virtue of having been designed for the job. OCaml, I can't really warm up to OCaml. It just looks too weird for me. But on the other hand, it keeps winning the benchmarks, turning in the fastest times. It's blazingly, astoundingly, unbelievably fast, and well, I think that's important. Erlang. Well, so that is a little sample of code that you use to count integers in Erlang. Since Erlang doesn't have loops and doesn't have variables, you receive a message, and if the message tells you to increment, you call yourself with a argument one larger, and if it asks you to report to somebody, you send the report back and call yourself with the same argument. After you've opened the top of your head, reached in and turned your brain inside out, this starts to look like a natural way to count integers. And Erlang does require some fairly serious mental readjustment. However, having spent some time playing with this, I tell you that if somebody came to me and wanted to pay me a lot of money to build a large-scale message handling system that really had to be up all the time, it couldn't afford to ever go down for years at a time, I would unhesitatingly choose Erlang to build it in. It has exactly the right stuff for that kind of thing, and I think it's crucially important that some of the other programming languages that we use learn the lessons that Erlang is trying to teach. Another interesting language is Scala, which is a statically typed language that runs on the JVM and has type inference. So you don't have to do 13 lines of declaration to get 4 variables. And the programs are thus immensely shorter than the corresponding Java programs. James Gosling loves it. There's lots of good stuff out there on the web. One of my favorite things is a weblog called Graceless Failures, which is published by 5 or 6 members of the Twitter engineering team, documenting their progress in learning the ins and outs, and especially the outs of Scala as they re-engineer part of the back end of Twitter in Scala. Another interesting new language that I'd never heard of until I started working on Widefinder is the Fan programming language, which runs on both the JVM and .NET, and I look at the code and I can read it all without ever having studied Fan, and it produced some excellent timing results on the Widefinder, so go check it out, it's pretty interesting. Another debate that's going on out there is the debate around static or dynamic typing. And we may all think at this conference the dynamic one. Static typing is for the fusty old guard bureaucrats, but that's just not true. I mean, there are actually some good things that static typing buys you, most notably performance and ease of construction of IDEs. And despite what all the small talk graybeards, I can talk about graybeards say, there are some good arguments in some cases for using static things. There are also good arguments on the other side for using dynamically typed languages, and I can tell you one thing, which is that this argument isn't over. Last question I want to address is this one, which is very much in the minds of the community, in particular the Ruby community, where I spend a lot of my life. So here's a little section of code where I had a huge hash table that I wanted to find the 10 highest values out of. You can do that just by doing a sort on value, except for it had millions of elements and it went away for a couple of minutes while it sorted. So instead I wrote a little linear scan to run through and find the 10 highest values, and without even thinking, because I was in Ruby, I just opened the hash class and added a talk method to it, and I was showing this to a person who wasn't a Rubyist, and they said, "Are you crazy? You just subverted the entire built-in hash table class?" Well, yeah, seemed like the easiest thing to do, and that's monkey patching, and monkeys are so cute and adorable, but on the other hand, there may be grounds to worry about just reaching in there and subverting the built-in system classes. Gila Braha, who was one of the really smart people, and one of the guys who built large parts of Hotspot, is deeply uncomfortable with it. And the more I think about it, I wonder if maybe the monkey isn't actually entirely on our side. And so I have one closing question, which is, for a programmer, is this a good time to be alive? Yeah, obviously. Thanks, bye.